everyone in the panel can introduce themselves. Keir.
I'm Keir Neuringer, play the saxophone, live in Philadelphia.
Ras Moshe Burnett, saxophone, tenor saxophone, and flute, from Brooklyn.
Melanie Dyer, viola, from Colorado. But I live here now.
Okay. So William Parker, and I am a musician and activist. And on this panel is made up of musicians, and there are no psychologists or no experts who study the idea of race and gender here, but we all live, and race and gender subject is sort of reflective of how it works through our creative lives and in the world of music. And so we're all going to share our ideas on it and sort of bounce off each other in an informal kind of way. One of the things that runs through our society is we have selected amnesia, which has been running through our world since the beginning of the formation of the United States, where, and that is basically not seeing things that happened, things that are wrong, things that should not have happened, and looking the other way, or only remembering things that we want to remember. Okay, like as kids, you grow up and you watch these James Bond movies, and James Bond is slapping the woman across the hall and up against the wall, and then you say, oh, that was a great movie. That was like James Bond, man, he's the greatest. And then you realize later that, wow, that was this guy was a pig. He was abusive, a pig, and we didn't say anything. We paid money to see an abusive pig in a fictional movie do things that were supposed to be fantastic, and we didn't say anything. So not only did we saw it, and we forgot about it. Another example, of course, is the myopic view of America and the idea that, okay, apple pie and coffee. There was a song, let's have another cup of coffee and let's have another piece of pie. Just around the corner is a rainbow in the sky. That's the beginning of it. And then while you're having a cup of coffee over here and another piece of pie over here, Mr. Jones is being lynched. And he's hanging from a tree. And you're saying, just around the corner is a rainbow in the sky. Let's have another cup of coffee. Let's have another piece of pie. So again, this is not even awareness. It's not like we knew about it. We weren't even sort of swayed to think about it. We weren't swayed, we were the idea of male chauvinism, treating women unfairly, treating minorities unfairly, like they don't exist. And we put these blinders on because it's the way of life, we're told. And then today people say, well, I had nothing to do with slavery. I had nothing to do with setting the indigenous people in reservations. I had nothing to do with the abuse of women. And but you know about it, so we just can't, if we had nothing to do with it, then you can do something about it. Okay, not just to say in your life, but you can make people aware of that these things exist and begin to straighten out the crook or the turn. So, and it's this sleepy underground thing that just people they just don't, until it happens to their kids, till it happens to them, they don't care, whatever it is. And the idea is that if it happens to a kid in India, and we always thought this in the 70s, like, man, we're gonna play music to save that little kid who we saw on the street starving. And they said, well, how are you gonna do that? He said, man, I'm gonna find a way to play music that kid's gonna get better and be uplifted by my music playing in New York, and they're gonna feel it in India. And that was the credo. That I don't have to, I'm obviously, if I can't go to India, but I'm gonna play sound that's gonna make the earth vibrate, and that vibration goes all around the world. And he said, wow, why is that kid so happy? Because the creativeness is saying, well, okay, we don't have this, we don't have that, but we uplift ourselves. And so people here are really sleeping, mind frozen, brain frozen, spirit frozen. So we're going to talk about these things and how we can wake up people. The phrase, we have to wake up our wake up. Okay, so I'm awake, but is our awake asleep? So let's start with, let's talk about these things, race and gender. Melanie, you want to chime in?
I didn't really prepare an opening statement. I suppose from the standpoint of talking about how I, not just myself, but me and a collectives of individuals who have shared our resources to try to support, a transformation of consciousness among people who are, within our most immediate sphere. I can probably just give an example of one way that in my own life experience that has happened from a personal standpoint. I had a home in Harlem. It was in central Harlem. And there I and my then partner and other people organized a multi-generational, multicultural collective of individuals, ethnic backgrounds. We had just everyone represented. And when I say that, I do mean, everyone. I mean indigenous peoples, Asian peoples, peoples from the, Pan-African diaspora, people of African descent, people of European descent. We all came together, and I was able to share my house as a resource for different kinds of presentations. Some of them were music. Some of them were one-act plays. We did film. We did poetry. We did. We had grassroots activists, eco-socialists come and, offer information and and about their activities, and it was really quite wonderful in that it was pretty much open to the public. I mean, we asked people to suggest a donation at the door. Everybody took a people came to meetings with ideas, and let's say if there were a group of college students that had an idea that they wanted to do, we would all, as a collective, get behind their idea. So, for example, one set of people wanted to do a one-act play. So some people did the website, some people did the outreach, some people did the food. We had people who were interested in like raw food and stuff, and we had another person whose father was owned a Chinese restaurant. He would donate, chickens, and we just brought all of our resources together to make these different events happen, and they were really quite extraordinary events, and they were attended by, people who were unemployed, who were working, who were in the neighborhood, who were visiting New York, who were artists, who were musicians. It was just, really kind of a microcosm of of our, social spectrum. And there's one particular thing that I like to tell people about. One of the events, one of the, groups within the collective had wanted to, knew that these indigenous activists were visiting New York. And so they just invited them to come to the house. And so we had a Pacific Islander who was an activist. The whole event was around the sovereignty of indigenous people and the activism that they were involved in, in different places across the country. So one was a Pacific Islander. Another one was Tawakasin Ghost Horse, who is a leader in the Lakota Nation. Another was a leader in the Iroquois Nation. Another was a scholar, an activist named Ray he had an Italian last name. I can't remember. I think it's Trafoco. Do you know him? I know who you're talking about. You know what I'm talking about? Ray. He's blind. Right. Yeah. It's going to come to me in a second. Yeah. So we probably had about 70 people in a hot-ass, parlor floor, with fans on, and each of the activists delivered what they were doing and how people who were there could help, both in their own spaces and help, the activities and the advocacies that were going on in these different regions. And so there was this one woman who, it was really about consciousness raising. And there was this one woman, she's probably, maybe in her mid-40s or so. Sometimes you can't tell with people, But she was really, moved by what she'd heard by these activists that day. And she said, what can happen to fundamentally it's raise the consciousness, the mindfulness of in a mass kind of way, what can be done in this world to change people's transform people's fundamental consciousness. So it's like raises up to another level on this mass level. She was asking this really big question. And so they all kind of huddled in this conference, you know. They were like, hold on just a second. And they turned their backs and they all got in this circle and they probably talked about it for about, I don't know, about 5 minutes. They were really deliberated. And then they turned back around and they said, music. Music is the one language that can fundamentally, you know, transform people on like a subatomic biological. And we know this because we know that we can come into a space feeling one way and hear music and then leave that space full of ideas, full of, you know, a new way of feeling. You know, maybe it has moved you from one emotional or mental space into another. But I think that, you know, there are a lot of abstract languages in the arts. The arts, generally speaking, you know, and I've talked about this before, color vibrates through visual arts. There's movement. There's a language of movement. There's a language, the abstract language of music. These are all kinds of abstracts, but they, you know, they speak to us in ways that, you know, kind of transcend any spoken language. They're all vibrating, things that vibrate. Color vibrates, movement vibrates, sound vibrates. Even as we now know, you know, thoughts vibrate and so on. So I think that what you were saying, William, earlier, you know, there are non-musicians, there are like people who have long considered this and who fundamentally understand, you know, the importance of sending out and of what you say, because what we say also vibrates. Yeah.
Well, how do you go deeper than that? I mean, you have people like Charlie Parker, who played a lot of music came through him, but the music didn't stop him from shooting dope. So, and this is an observation I made. You know, when you're dealing with people like Miles Davis, and Miles Davis plays some beautiful music, but he plays his music at the club, and he comes back home, and he's got a woman chained to the radiator. So how come his music doesn't save him from doing it? Where's his consciousness that he shouldn't be chaining people to the radiator?
Well, I've thought about that too, and I'm gonna pass it on to you guys after this. But I mean, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, we are all subject to, you know, our social environments. We are all deeply flawed individuals, and I don't think we can always, I mean, I just think that, you know, it would be folly to try to equate individual character because, you know, I mean, I'm not, you know, maybe I could play some beautiful stuff, but I've done some really shitty things in my life too, and toward people and toward myself. You know, I don't know that anyone really escapes that unless they become, I don't know, lead some kind of ascetic life or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if the ascetics escape it, frankly. But, you know, human beings are deeply, deeply flawed. But I don't know that from from the standpoint of an artist, you know, I always think, okay, I am going to ready my tools. You know, that's the discipline of the art, is that you practice your art so that you can be ready for whatever divine thing is going to come through you. And maybe in that sense, there is something, divine in all of us, even though, I mean, how can you explain that? Other than, we have this history, we have these personal histories, we have these social histories, and we absorb all of that. And sometimes so much so to the point where, I don't know, we don't recognize ourselves or don't even recognize it. So I can't explain that part.
Yeah, thanks again for having me be part of this discussion, and I always look forward to this festival every year, combination of new faces and people that have been living in my record player forever, so there's a very good dialectic, and thanks to William Parker especially, and I appreciate how you opened up this discussion. I was one of those young people in the community that was moved by the recordings that you were on. Growing up in East New York, Survival Ensemble, Ensemble Muntu, Cecil Taylor. Not, the music exists in spite of different time periods, not to be stuck there, but sometimes I use them as reference points in reference to what came later, the foundation of what generated an interest. There's a lot of vital music being played right now. But the dialectic or duality in this music that we're speaking of, I always noticed that even before I could articulate it, being a musician and an activist as well, and coming up in the early 80s is really when I was coming of age as an adolescent and a teenager, and that was a reactionary time, and it was a very fruitful time at the same time. People in different areas of jazz expression were able to do projects and play, and then there was a lot of reactionary things going on, especially within the music, theories about especially what people in the community could or couldn't understand. And I don't remember things that way, and it's tying in with what you both were saying. I pretty much remember people in the community listening to music that was very cutting edge. There were black people that liked it and black people that didn't like it, but this stereotype about the black community, especially their supposed lack of understanding of what's known as the free jazz or the avant-garde, is a generalization, because I always hung out with older people personally. I didn't really hang out with anybody my age. I mean, I did a little bit as a child, but there were people that were young adults at the time or now middle-aged, or people who were middle-aged at the time that are no longer here. And, they would be playing jazz records and talking about the black movement, so it was normal to me to do the same, not so much to emulate personalities or to replicate behavior that was damaging that you spoke of. And I understand that now, looking at a lot of the musicians I admire and myself, even though whatever mistakes exist might not be at a Miles Davis kind of level, but this music provides direction for us. The spiritual aspect of what we were discussing. The music seems to be this thing that people can come to, people of different kinds of characters and have a voice, even different kinds of sociological perspectives, And I noticed that that's a testament to the power of the music itself, is that it cuts through these differences, even though I'm of the belief that it represents basically revolutionary consciousness, and it is the voice of, it's a parallel dynamic to what was happening in the black community as far as the evolution of whatever social activity was going on. And sometimes there's denial about that, but it's pretty clear what was happening. And that spark, as a young person growing up and collecting records, I can testify to that the music does provide direction in spite of the ongoing evolution of the self. The music has that positivity. That's how I always viewed it, especially the very intense kind of free jazz playing. I always viewed it as kind of like a celebration. And all the truth about life is certainly involved, but the duality is always present. And also the ongoing debate, which it shouldn't be a debate at this point, about the social relevancy of jazz, especially free jazz. That's very clear. You know, one of the sources of the disagreement with that perspective is, one is that the nature of how the music is, it doesn't retain the same kind of cultural retention that previous stages of jazz did, because it doesn't have this or doesn't have that, which ultimately is a generalization of black musicians and black listeners. You know, if the music is going past the bar lines, that somehow means that it's not connected culturally, or accusations of, oh, well, this is influenced by Europe, or that's influenced by Europe. But that's the foundation of jazz in general, is a composite of cultural influences pioneered by black musicians. But as far as the execution of it, it was always a world music, even though that became a term business-wise that got put onto a specific area. But that's basically what jazz has always been. Secondly, in my activist history, there are people who say, well, if the music doesn't have words, then they don't understand how music can exist that does not have that. And music with words is always going to be important, because you can get across a message pretty much directly. You know, music with a topical focus is very important. One theory is that one can feel the implications, the social implications, through the sound in the music, even if there's no words. You know, there could be an energy that can imply that there's some kind of change being sought. You know, the importance of revolutionary change like that. And that message was so urgent, you know, it kind of fired me up as a young guy coming up in Brooklyn, even though I was acquainted with it, because my father, who passed in 2014, played saxophones as well. And, you know, he was listening to a lot of free jazz as well as a lot of black music in general. You know, although I think I got into the music for my own reasons, it doesn't make sense to deny the connection, you know. So I say all that to say that even before I could develop the ability to articulate why the music has a social connection, you can feel it. It can be implied, even though the music doesn't have words, through the energy of what's being played. The intensity alone can say that. The debates about whether John Coltrane had a social consciousness never ceased to be amusing, you know, because I guess their point is that he didn't mention it in an interview or something, you know. That's supposed to represent revolution, you know, that you're going to announce your consciousness in an interview. And plus, you know, he was from the South pretty much, and brothers like that, they're not super talkative about a lot of sociological views all the time, or not publicly. But I mean, the elders that I grew up with who knew him and were around him indeed testified to the fact that he had a strong social outlook. You know, and it doesn't mean that you have to have generic dislikes of whole groups of people. You know, that's one of the first topics that come up when the discussion related to politics, quote unquote, and free jazz come up, you know. So it always has to be explained that it's possible to have this consciousness minus generalizations of people and stuff like that, which is a larger generalization of black people with a social consciousness, you know. But yeah, and going back to what Melanie said as well, there's a spiritual side of the music and social side, and it's not a contradiction for all these dynamics to exist. And I think that the music does play a role in making us better people, you know, in different degrees and stuff like that. I know it helped form my understanding in a lot of different ways. And I had the honor of being a recent returnee to school and being a college graduate and all of that, and you know, and I appreciated that. It gave me an outlet to write about music as well, and really see the interconnection between musical genres, which I always knew existed. You know, like for instance, writing papers about the history of opera and Western classical music. That music is always spoken of in terms of being high class or something like that, but that's always, that music is always spoken of in relation to the patrons of the art, you know, which is okay because you need patrons, but you know, the lives of the people who created that music pretty much parallel the lives of jazz musicians. And the more you study about that, I'm like, wow, you know, they locked up Bach in the joint, you know, for disrespecting the Duke, and I said, wow, this sounds familiar, you know. So it could add more to what you know or what you think you know, these connections between genres as well. And it just deepens and strengthens your understanding of what you're involved in. And I would agree with William as well that this music definitely is a revolutionary force, and it needs to be heard in the community more. It's intentionally not. You know, they pumped a lot of dumb music in the black community to affect the cognitive processes of subsequent generations of black people in the community, because as powerful as the state is, they were kind of caught off guard in the late 60s and early 70s. So I guess one of the tools of warfare was to change the message in the music, even to the point sometimes in some academic circles you have a rationalization of the N-word and it's only just a word, and et cetera, rationalizing the things that we were supposed to fight, you know. But I'm sure we'll get back to that anyway, but thanks.
Thanks for having me on this panel. I want to tell a representative story from my experience that relates to the topic of race and gender and access to resources. I had recently been, this is going back several years, but I was recently new on a particular scene, and I have a habit of running my mouth against what I perceive as an injustice, and I was doing that at a party among some new friends, and someone said, you know, there's a bunch of people who meet to talk about the scene and making the scene better, and we'd like, you should show up, you should participate. So I went to the first meeting, and everybody was talking about how they can get more money for their projects, how they can get more media on their projects. And I sat and I listened. I was new in the room, about half a dozen, maybe 10 people in the room. And about 3/4 of the way through the meeting, someone said, "Keir, do you have anything to say?" And I looked around the room and I said, "We're all white men in this room. This is a secret society right now, and I don't want to be in a secret society. We're talking about increasing access to resources, and this is a problem. The faces in this room need to change." Someone in the room quickly piped up, "We are not going to solve racism and sexism at this meeting. So let's continue. And without exception, everyone in the room chose to continue talking about how they could increase access for their projects. And that, like I said, is a representative example from my experience navigating the scene where I live and all of the scenes where I've lived, with the relation to race, gender, and access to resources. Although I do think it is suspect to talk about proximity as a way of proving oneself, proving oneself not problematic, let's say, or pointing a finger over there at somebody to show that a person is, A-okay. I also want to say that the story that I just said is a story of betrayal, and one could say accomplishing, and at the very least, one of accountability. And I think that's a way that we can address these things in the scene. There are some buzzwords like call out culture and canceling that goes on a lot, and I think you even touched on that when you brought up Miles Davis, right? What could have happened in a different time to someone like that who had made a habit of beating up the women in his life, or abusing the women in his life. He wasn't canceled. He wasn't called out. He wasn't held accountable. And perhaps one of the reasons, beyond some kind of musical genius, that his music resonates so much is that the absence of accountability on that particular note allowed him access to continued resources. The recordings are beautiful, and the access to recordings are immense, and the possibility of performing over and over again and getting better and better and better and better existed in the absence of accountability on this consideration. I'm not calling for anybody to be canceled, but that's kind of a buzzword around these topics lately. I do prefer the notion of accountability, and from my particular experience and position in the scene and in society, I think betrayal and accomplishing are other buzzwords that are important to engage. This is what I'm saying is very separate to the actual question of the spiritual resonance of the music, or the Melanie, what you brought up, which I think these are separate things. That I like to hash that question out on stage or in rehearsal, and I think I tend to agree with you, or William, what you were talking about, with playing music of such depth that in some intangible way it brightens something for someone on the other side of the world. I would never speak against it. The only thing I can do, though, is play for it in words. And when those words turn into some kind of activism, I think then I can't really get on one side or the other of the question of whether the music the notes, the pitches, the rhythms, the collaboration, the performance actually addresses these things in a tangible way for people who are negatively affected. But I do know that there are things that we can tangibly do, and I think that, again, from my perspective, from my standpoint, sometimes it's a matter of taking a step back to make room for others, and sometimes it's a matter of taking a step forward, where the possibility of increasing access to resources, which makes the music resonate for more people. That's where I'm at.
Well, in 1957, when John Coltrane spoke about a spiritual awakening, which changed his life, and if we're not, if you don't get that spiritual awakening, some kind of awakening that changes the way you eat, changes the way you take care of yourself, changes the way you treat people, changes the way you interact with your partner and your friends and neighbors. What do? You continue to to sort of justify what you do because you don't know any better. Now you say, well, now this person who's doing these things, he's not stupid. He's got a high IQ. He's got all of these accolades. He can play his trumpet or bass, whatever he plays, upside down. But at the same time, at the end of the night, he's going to the dope house to put a needle in his arm. And he's going to do other detrimental things. So that's his struggle. And what I learned is saying, okay, well, how can someone, because musicians have all kinds of personalities, some of them are very nasty and not nice, and then they get on the bandstand, they play, and the most beautiful music comes through them. And then so my immediate reaction is that they're not making it. They're a vessel or conduit that does not discriminate. That does not discriminate from, what health they're in, how they treat people. It's just coming through them. The other part is something they have got to work on in their lives. If they can become aware that they shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that, and they shouldn't, they want to become whole beings because the music they're playing is whole. It's just they're trying to catch up to this illuminated music that they're playing, but they themselves, just don't get it. And as you say, people are flawed and people are working on it, but in our society, the things that educate us have to be lifted up. The things that our awareness of our environment, and human beings, I mean, I've been to street fairs, and where like a 5-year-old kid, his father's got his 5-year-old kid, and and there's a girl there, and he's there, and they don't want to mess with me, but the father's saying, "That's your lady. Go ahead, go get her. That's your lady." So the father's teaching this kid this macho thing of you don't wait on an invitation, just grab her, go get her. And he's been taught that every day. And unless he gets a counter teaching, he's going to grow up like that. And then, but one day he just might get out of bed and bang, it rings. I can't do that anymore. I heard, whether I read something, whether I heard this music, whether I looked up at the sky, because enlightenment comes in all ways. You could be doing nothing, something, and then, but that enlightenment has to happen to change your life. If the enlightenment does not happen, you continually do the same thing and justify it. And on the other hand, the other musicians who are just playing saxophone patterns and have not been able to elevate their music up like that, they're trying to figure out, how can I do that? Or they're saying, well, playing saxophone patterns is enough. You know, so-and-so did it, and he was the #1 saxophone player. And so-and-so did it, and he was the #1 saxophone player. You know. And so what do I need to make my music go like that for? I want to be the #1 saxophone player. You know, I don't want to like change people's lives. I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want to be the #1 saxophone player and be great. So you have all of these struggles and bouncing back of things in life, and what group, you know, you have a group and you're saying, okay, what can we do to make a little bit of a dent in the people that are around us, okay? And, you know, teach your kids, have workshops, have them listen to music, take dance lessons, just teach them how to play with each other, you know, how to interact with people. There's certain things you just don't do. You just don't do. I mean, my first day at kindergarten, that's why I hated school from day one. You know, man, you know, I was having a ball at home, believe me, man. I had everything. And so she says, I got to go to kindergarten. So I sit down, and the kid next to me, bam, hits me in the head. I mean, come on, man. It's like, this is school? This is my introduction to school? You know, and then they say, well, he hit you in the head because he wants to play with you, and he doesn't know how to express it. I said, oh. So anyway, so
He beat you because he loves you.
yes. So
He was taught to do it.
So how can we, in the time that we live, and time is precious, or there's a bass player named Fred Hopkins, and one thing, we were hanging out, and he said to me, there's one thing in life you don't get back, and that's time. And that's true. So how do we pick our time, whatever age we are, that we're going to approach this, and how do we pick the time, and what our efforts are going to be to make changes in ourselves and the world around us? Anybody have any idea?
Pass it to you 1 second.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very important points. Yeah, about that. I think there's different levels of understanding as far as gender relations. And Melanie's going to have to speak on this in 1 second. I noticed that in reference to what just came up about character of the musicians. I remember the early 90s, the whole talk show boom that was happening. And I was a street vendor at the time for a while, selling Black history books and stuff like that. I did that many years. I did that while I went to school for the first time. And that's how I used it to buy a couple of instruments and stuff. But I remember brothers in the audience of these talk shows putting down Alice Walker pretty bad. And she was just talking about the reality of what's happening in life like that. And I knew some of those brothers, so I would cringe, sometimes. But then when Miles's autobiography came out and certain things that was in there, I'm saying this as a lover of Miles's music, everybody was like, yeah, right on, And so, and even, so that increased my education about that even more, about the importance of not idolizing the people that you like to listen to. And you could, the older you get, you can contextualize why people engage in certain kinds of behavior, the more you understand about their lives and the childhoods of people like Miles Davis and other musicians who were abusive and got a pass for it through it being seen through the lens of being some kind of artistic aesthetic or something, as you just said, and as you just said, as well. So I think what could help is that subsequent generations of musicians doing things differently, even if there's some people that can or won't change about that, do your best to share what you've learned or share whatever kind of personal evolution you've had, and keep it cyclical so it could pass on. Because I was thinking, I had a conversation with a younger relative of mine who said, because I was putting down R. Kelly pretty bad. She said, well, you still listen to Miles Davis. You post him on social media every other day. And that's a very good point, but I was doing it in reference to the innovative nature of the music and to counteract some of the generalizations about the early stages of quote-unquote electric music, because it was coming out of the avant-garde even before it became really watered down and commercial by the mid-late 70s. The early stages of what's known as fusion had a certain kind of energy of it that was coming out of the gains, people like Bill Dixon, Cecil, Sonny Murray. And so I think it's important for the people who are playing the music to understand, well, this, what this person did is not very good, and not to embrace a lot of negative behavior and try to make it an aesthetic like that. I think I'm better with that these days myself, with the people I like to listen to. Not that I ever excused it myself, or abuse of women was never one of my imperfections personally, but I have seen it, and I grew up in the cultural nationalist movement, so I witnessed certain things. I witnessed negative modes of behavior be internalized and promoted as a cultural dynamic, when what they were doing was replicating what happened with the onset of slavery and patriarchy, and imitating the mindsets of people who imposed things on people who were generating capital through free labor and stuff like that. But I prefer to look at the ethics of what was happening previously for a greater understanding of things. Sorry.
Gee, so this question of gender, was that where we're heading? No. Well, I think we can improve the next generation of people by example. And right now, the whole point of the story that I was telling you earlier is, the idea is one of inclusiveness. And I think that, women, in the music industry is a reflection of every other industry you can think of. Where women work and that women occupy, that, people of, transgender, gender fluid people occupy, there is, the creative industry has no monopoly on exclusion. So I think that that's one thing, to just be mindful of. I know it's very difficult for anyone to pursue, to try to live and pay your bills and, and play music. It depends, of course, on what kind of music you're playing. Like, you can play some music and have a salary, and be able to practice all day, or, have, 4, 5, 10 rehearsals before you actually go to a performance, because you're paying all your people and nobody's, out there trying to hustle up, different gigs, and people have time. That does actually exist, in certain genres. But, we don't all have that, and we do what we can with what we have. But I think it's important to pool resources. That's part of the story that I was telling earlier, is that there was no single individual, no single entity that was doing everything, everybody had something to give, and they gave what they had to give in order to make it possible for all of these different things to happen, both music and, other art forms and disciplines and so on. So I think that's important. I think it's important, to understand that women have something to offer. It may not always be what we think of as, this stridently male kind of thing. I don't know how else to say it, but it can be just, it can be just as intense and just as powerful and just as strident and just as quiet and just as still and just as peaceful and just as powerful and just as consciousness raising and just as skilled and virtuosic and so on. But I think oftentimes, many women who are just excluded from platforms and rendered invisible. But that also is not necessary. That just means that this space is just as subject to the gender and gender biases and gender politics as any other space. Yep.
So so we have to, so what you're saying is that we have to include how to live in the curriculum.
Yes, I think we have to include it by example. I think you do it by doing, not by, you can talk.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my mother told me you don't throw paper on the floor. And to this day, I don't throw garbage on the floor.
Because Bobby, maybe she didn't throw paper on the floor either.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
but, right? So you have to do it, but you also have to tell people, don't do that, son. Don't do that. Don't take any crap from here.
Yeah,
don't do this. Don't do that. And of course you have to be consistent where tell them one thing and you're doing another thing.
Exactly. I was going to say I raised 4 children and they got their eyes on you all the time.
Yeah,
and as soon as you do something that is contrary to what you say, they will call you on it. And that's, that's part of the brilliance of who they are. It's like, wait a second. And even when they're not, when it seems like they're not paying attention to you, they are zeroed in on you all the time. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's important. But I don't think it's something that's relegated to children, okay? I think there's some educating that we can do amongst our peers and amongst our, adults. And, if we are individuals who are constant in the process of becoming, then we owe it to one another, to our peers, to call each other or to lead by example or to say, yo, wait a second, this is what you're doing or what you're saying, or the way you're saying this, or the way you're going about this is not the right way, I just, I believe in the human capacity to grow and become and transform. If I didn't, what am I doing this for? And in my own capacity. And I also recognize, our flaws. I think we're just lucky that the earth itself, this living organism that we're on hasn't said, I've had enough of you and just, shake us off, which, it's not beyond the possibility of that still happening. But, and if it did, it would be completely and utterly justified, in my opinion. But, while you're still here, why not?
I think people would have musical talent sometime had bad parenting. And, I don't mean bad, it's in different degrees, but what you were just outlining, how can a person express such beautiful music? It really goes down to what you said about what you tell young people, when they're younger.
one of the ways I think about these questions, I certainly agree with the idea of exampling for people, whether they're children or they're our peers. And I think a lot about empathy as a important, maybe the most important thing to exemplify for other people. Because from that, everything else, I think, goes. But I also think a lot about different kinds of literacy. And as an example, I'm going to tell you a joke that I taught my son when he was 3 years old. He's now 4. So he's been enjoying this joke for about a year, and he tells it back to me and to everybody. And the joke is, what's one guy on stage? A soloist. It's 2 guys on stage. A duo. What's 5 guys on stage? The patriarchy. Thank you. Thank you. But the reason I share that joke is that my 3-year-old then has the vocabulary. He doesn't know exactly what the patriarchy is, but we're starting, right? We're starting that there is this concept. We take it for granted. What's 5 guys on stage? Because there's going to be 5. You're going to go to a show. There's going to be 5 guys on stage. Who are the guys? Who are the guys who are playing, right? We're always guys. We're always guys in the scene, right? That's a thing that's been taken for granted for so long. And I talked before about how I tend to run my mouth against perceived injustice for my whole life. But my understanding of and my analysis of what constitutes injustice has changed. And I'm in my early 40s. For so much of my life, my notion of injustice was as it pertained to me, as an artist especially, right? Because we artists are marginalized in this culture. And so much did I perceive that I didn't perceive the other forms of marginalization, and which is a problem. But you know, I gave the example before of this idea of a secret society that I was not formal but informal, not even informal, but just de facto. And that happens so much on stage. It's so difficult, and I do see things changing in really beautiful ways. And in the last, probably everybody has a different notion of this, but in the last maybe 5-10 years, things are changing, but not fast enough. And not fair enough. And so the more we can increase literacy, certain kinds of literacy, so that we don't take things as, we don't see things how they've been as neutral, right? 5 guys on stage isn't a quintet, right? For example, 6 white guys in a room talking about increasing resources for their work isn't just a couple of artists. There's something else going on, and if we can see that, if we can critique the things that we see and the ways that people self-select or people organize, and if we can point that out in any way possible to as many people, to our peers and to kids coming up, I think that's a hopeful way. So you talk about you started off talking about James Bond, and one thing you didn't say, he was a pig because he was like slapping women around, right? He was also a fucking spy for the United Kingdom, right? Like, that's not our friend. That's not our friend, right? That, and I'll still watch a James Bond movie, but with a critique, right? I'll still watch whatever, Captain America, but with a critique. And also, if there are children in my life, my kid, other kids, who who want to enjoy that. We're going to watch it with a critique, not to ruin the fun, but to not to be complacent. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, so let's do a wrap up here. Final statement. Everybody will do a minute statement, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience, if there are, or comments from the audience. We have to think. We have to, one of the good things that I ran into at a young age was philosophy, and particular, Socrates and his student Plato, and learning how to think and to not just see and hear and see the things that aren't there and see and examine the things that are there. And yep, okay.
Well, I think that we have to, I believe in collective, and I just think that we have to share our resources, share the resources that you have, whether it is the ability to provide an opportunity for someone or to provide space, provide, whatever you have. I just believe that it lightens the load all the way around for everyone, and to be inclusive. I think it's our only means of survival, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe in the power of the music, especially the new music, and the positive effect it could have on personal change and social change. And that's probably, it's heard, but it needs to be heard on the mass level, like pop music is as well. Let it go through the process of assimilation in regular communities, so people can absorb it or reject it, but let them be exposed to it so they can make the decision. And but the music is a very positive force, and I can attest to it in reference to those positive changes.
And the thing I'm still thinking about is access to resources and how it applies disproportionately access or lack of access to different people, and what role we can have from our unique perspectives in challenging those power structures. And but it's an ongoing project. It's definitely an ongoing project.
Okay. So any questions or comments from the audience before we head out?
In the jazz world, yeah, it's a dialectic. I apologize about the use of that word. It's lost its profundity, but it still exists. In one way, a lot of the extended techniques that's known as free jazz playing has been incorporated in the jazz language. In some instances, not with the understanding where it comes from. But that's a natural process with things that start out controversial, and then that's just an unfortunate constant that it's going to be marginalized. And around the early 80s, it became even more intentional to marginalize, because the narrative that was being defined was very reactionary. And it was a false representation of the music that predated free jazz, because bebop wasn't about conservatism. A lot of the rehashes of bebop was about, they conservatized what that music was about. But the same energy that went on with the changes that Charles Parker and Bud Powell were making, it's a similar sociological and artistic intent.
I think you have to put that into a historical context. Blues was the devil's music. Swing was salacious. Bebop, like every single time, the innovators are always, 40 or 50 years ahead of everybody else, and marginalized, and unable to really survive, in and until somebody starts making some money from it, and then all of a sudden, wow, Carnegie Hall is opening up its doors, and and then there's another cycle that takes place, is that because this music comes out of the African American experience and aesthetic, largely, if not wholly, and is has been in each, over the decades, I would have to say that, bebop, and even that which became before bebop, was also a reflection of, what was happening socially. Not to mention that, Black people in general, we just place a really high premium on everybody being unique and new. That's just part of what our culturally aesthetic value is, to do something that nobody else has done in a way that nobody else has done it. You can see it in music, you can see it in just about anything, culturally speaking. So yeah, I think it's happened in hip hop, Cats were, selling homemade CDs out the back of their car until somebody decided, until somebody figured out they were making some money, and money could be made, and then it became codified and, packaged and branded and, commercialized. And now what had started out as a very socially conscious message has been degraded, into, misogynistic, what I would have to say is self-hate, and but that's not how it started out. That's not how it began,
In the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover followed civil rights leaders, kept files on Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and others. And unlike the 50s, the musicians who were playing the fire music were making statements on their LPs. They were talking about freedom. They were talking about self-expression. And the bebop musicians didn't really talk about that. Their liner notes were written by Ira Gitler and this one and that one, and they didn't talk about that. So if Mingus is talking about, fables of fathers and freedom, the FBI is there. The FBI monitors these things and says, okay, we have to keep this, we have to figure out how to keep this music away from the people, okay? But what we can do for the people is we can give them some dope. We can give them some drugs in the community. We can put non-cognitive things in the community so they don't think, because thinking moves to getting unity, getting together, and moving forward. And I think that was a calculated effort to do that. When a band like Return to Forever came out, the FBI, they said, would you like to follow Return to Forever? They said, no. They're not dangerous. And nowadays, the hip hop movement, these guys are not followed by the FBI, maybe as a routine, but they're so ineffective as being a threat to anything. It's just money. It's just routinely, money and revenue. So things, when the music first came, was out in the 60s, that whole period, it was considered dangerous. It was considered dangerous. So I think that's why it was, there was a conscious effort to download creativity and upload drugs and negativity.
Can I ask you a question, William?
Yes? No, yeah.
So, taking into the context that, the FBI got what I would consider got better at its work, how do you view somebody like, like Bud Powell, these folks that took these, what were commercial standards, in the 30s and in the 40s and, put their own, played it in a different way, transformed it language-wise, and yet we're still, there were white musicians who were doing the same thing and getting paid, and, and celebrated, and I would have to argue that, as we go back to this idea of abstract language and moving consciousness and how, these new innovations are an expression of not just, individual expression, but social expression and social movement. Do you think there's any distinction really between this, COINTELPRO and the way they approach people that were speaking and the people that were doing it in a more kind of underground, well, maybe not so overtly, more subliminal?
Well, I think if you were doing a music that caused confusion and that was misunderstood, and where they labeled, okay, the bebop musicians are all out. They're using drugs. They're ineffective. They're drawing music. People are moving away from this. You label it abstract. You label it obscure. You label it hard to listen to, and so its effectiveness, which is very effective. It wasn't what they played; it was how they played it and what they was doing. I mean, and it got diminished because of lack of control of music. They didn't own the music. They didn't have their own record companies. They didn't really have a pathway to people because, again, it said this a million times, the salvation of black music was black people, and it still is. If you got black people to listen to what you're calling free jazz, you'd be making money too. We wouldn't have to leave the United States and go to Europe because you could go anywhere in the States, do a concert, and it would be full, same as a Beyonce concert. But people over the years, the music has been taken away from them, and they don't know about it. But if they listen to it, if you put Andrew Cyrille on the same bill as Beyonce, they'll dig it. I never ran into anybody yet that did not dig this music.
Yeah,
They really like it.
I think that controlling and ownership is like a real serious, because even the attempts to, organize and, have your own record company, those have been, it's not that they have those attempts, though people haven't done it. It's that they've been, eliminated economically and otherwise from there being any chance of success. There have been, if black people are the only ones making money, then that's not considered, well, at least, up to a point. You can't be the only one. You'll get I hate the word, but blackballed from the industry.
You have, well, listen, isn't Quincy Jones a zillionaire?
Yeah, but who?
Oh, so why doesn't he start a record company where he's recording the music? He knows about the music. What's that? Oh, I mean, recorded Sonny Simmons? Well, he might. I don't know if he put somebody up front who was involved with it, and he didn't actually have his hand on it. You know, I mean, he that meeting he had with Herb Alpert for A&M, and he saw the revolutionary ensembles record at Herb Alpert's house, and he said, "Well, why are you recording this crap?" You know. And then so he called up John Snyder, and the label was busted. So one of the problems we have as far as black people with money is they're putting it in the wrong places.
Neo-colonialism.
You know. So anyway, you got to remember that in the black community, there's a word we call them Uncle Toms. Okay. Now, whether you can play the piano or not, or play the saxophone, it doesn't just make you not a Uncle Tom politically and socially.
It's very complicated. It's very complex, and you know there are all sorts of racial, economic, historical context for. Say what? Mental health. Oh no, and the mental health issues as well. Yeah, particularly with Bud.
You trying to say Bud had a mental health issue? No, brother, no. Nothing wrong with Bud, and was nothing wrong with Monk. You know that.
If I can connect that education piece to my thought about different kinds of literacy, and then back to what your question was about, whether there was an intentional effort to destroy the free jazz movement in the 60s, and whether that was based on race. I think that the music that we're talking about is music that comes out of and that expresses enthusiasm, intense enthusiasm, and as long as there's been the so-called Western conception of the state, there's been the danger that enthusiasm expressed through music presents to the state. That's something that Plato set up, and so that's deeply, 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 millennia deep, ingrained in our culture. And so whenever it pops up, and another really solid example of it is rave culture, where rave culture is culture that brings about exceptional enthusiasm, and in different ways has either been co-opted, colonized, gentrified. It was made illegal in the early 90s in either the UK or just in London, I can't remember. But and I think with my understanding of fire music or free jazz is the enthusiasm that it engenders is part of why it's danger, because once we're in the mode of enthusiasm, we're very hard to control. We're very excited, and what comes next is breaks down state control, I think.
Going into Foucault territory there. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I've heard many a tale, not just within the hip hop music industry, but also I've noticed that a lot of athletes, athletes are now, not just spending their money on, limousines with hot tubs in the back and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there is, some definite put money where a mouth is kind of things going on that are overlooked because we are so saturated in the media with all of the, negative kind of stuff. And I know that, at least for, around the young people that I live with and that I'm around, they are looking for, or they are actually tapping into, alternative information sources and sorting through it and, really being discerning about, the information that they take in and seek out, whereas a lot of the rest of us are just sitting around watching that bullshit opinion news cycle,
So we won't forget about hip hop if they don't forget about us. So we'll stop it right there with that thought, and I hope this panel has stimulated some thoughts and for future discussion. Okay, because it's a big subject, but we can, we just wake up. Can't be. It's going to take a long time to really get clarity on it, but it doesn't have to be that long. We can get some clarity. Like that's how clarity comes. It like bang, and so very good points, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Keir. Thank you, Ras Moshe, and thank you, Melanie Dyer. So,
Thank you for all that great music down through the years, man.